Hey there, folks. I'm Mark, in affiliation with Spectrum Pulse, and it's Billboard Breakdown. I don't remember. So, this is late, and given that I have a platform, I feel obligated to explain why it's late. And given that I've always described my mandate as speaking on music, movies, art, and culture, that last word implies politics. Really, they all do, as everything in society is political on some level, but I have never been one to keep it just about the music, man, because I don't think you can. And increasingly, I've been proven right in that assessment, and as I've got a platform, I will be using it to speak clearly and directly. And the gloves are off. So, last week, a police officer murdered a black man in Minnesota. His delay in being charged, the relative lightness of those charges only being amplified now, and the lack of charges for his accomplices, only being rectified again today, has set off widespread protest across the United States and world. The vast majority of these protests are entirely peaceful until the sadistic, extrajudicial, unprovoked, and frequently illegal escalation by police and far-right militias operating to kick off widespread conflict all over the US. Egged on by a proto-fascist coward in the White House, and an administration at multiple levels built on unchecked capitalism, graft, pseudo-religious propaganda, intellectual and moral bankruptcy, and, let's not forget, white supremacy, there have been popular uprisings across the country in response, asserting the truth that Black Lives Matter and that the military-industrial complex of the police must be put in check and significantly defunded. There are concrete, well-disseminated goals in this uprising that are available to be heard should you be willing to listen. Which is why yesterday, after making my own donations to bail funds, I took to social media silence in solidarity and used my platform instead to amplify voices of color driving towards emotional solace and real tangible change. Unfortunately, the music industry, which has spent decades valuing the art of black creators while systemically denying them a voice and a great deal of the profits, they also chose to fall silent and delay the Hot 100. And while on the surface, amplification seems laudable, major record labels and businesses have not put their money where their mouths are. And given Billboard is an arm of the music industry, are they really willing to own up to how they themselves have been flagrantly complicit in systemic disenfranchisement? I mean, from the formalization of the genre hierarchy built as marketing to segregate white and black music, splitting apart country and blues, from their blind eye to radio payola and the blackballing of artists across early days of rock and roll, to the segregation of black music and its own charts, unwilling to see the differences and complexities there in genre barriers that they themselves created, except of course when convenient miscategorizations have allowed the charts to be overrun by white acts. Look what happened to the R&B charts in the early 60s, or even how such a chart was called race records in the 40s. And I could go on. So I will. How so many of the best R&B was barred from the pop charts, which as a genre has been coded white, really to this day, and rarely afforded chart crossover, the failures to accommodate early rap to just bucket it in with R&B, which also continues to this day, how into the late 2000s, digital sales were not counted for those R&B and hip-hop charts, even as they were the mainstream Hot 100, which sparked a genre change, which later also became the case for Spotify and YouTube, which only got worse in the early 2010s when all genre-specific charts were instructed to pull from the same airplay set, which meant crossover pop records were far more likely to top those charts and place Billboard in the hopeless role of defining genre yet again. Which takes us to last year, because when Billboard must bow at the face of indignant and frequently racist Nashville radio, Lil Nas X gets thrown off the country charts. And while he ultimately got the last laugh here, at this point does Billboard really think they've got the moral authority to spread awareness by being silent when they refuse to acknowledge how complicit in this process they really are? And look, I get it if this is a lot to process, especially around what I've always deemed as a glorified stat pad. It's one reason I make fun of Billboard's frequent ineptitude as much as I do, because there's a whole lot of artists, predominantly black, who've just decided they don't have to care about Billboard as they will work around or outside of that system. But there are a whole lot of artists who do work within it, and they care, but they might not know nor understand the long-running systemic failures of this arm of the music industry. Or they do get it and they're just gonna try and beat the odds anyway, no matter how much those odds are stacked against you. And while I might be tempted to make a bad taste crack at the expense of Gunna's album bomb this week in parallel when it comes to broader base of failures, the truth is more serious. And I only gave you a sample of it. Black historians and music like Dark Adams have an encyclopedic knowledge of this, and I don't think it's noted how much that knowledge can be a load in and of itself, one that we should all share now if we want to make this better. And I'm not about to apologize for this being heavy or aggressive here either. We reflect the times in which we live, and we control what's in our mirror. And thus going from there, our top 10. Where I'll admit I was completely wrong on what's surging to number 1, even if in these times it feels completely weird as it is. Rain on Me by Lady Gaga and Ariana Grande, riding enormous sales, a radio surge, and robust streaming and YouTube. It's probably the most well-supported new number 1 I've seen the past couple of weeks, and if this momentum continues, and I frankly have no idea if it will, you cannot predict times like this in the same way, it could have the spot on lock for a bit. Or hell, it could fall back and Savage by Megan Thee Stallion and Beyonce could take back over from number 2, where frankly, it was only a margins game, only lagging a little bit on streaming and sales despite consistent and stronger radio growth. And let's not discount Rockstar by DaBaby and Roddy Ricch moving up to number 3, where it's become a streaming titan and has picked up real sales even if its radio is lagging. From there, Blinding Lights by The Weeknd fell back to number 4, it spent the entire week wavering on the radio, and while it's consistently strong elsewhere, it doesn't seem like it's going to get much bigger. And I could say something similar for Say So by Doja Cat featuring Nicki Minaj at number 5, where despite good streams, it had a rough week, both in sales and the radio. Then we had Tootsie Slide by Drake falling back to number 6, it was just losing everywhere, and that takes us to a small rebound of Don't Start Now by Dua Lipa up at number 7, which is just propped up on the radio at this point, and it is wavering. Then we had The Box by Roddy Ricch skid down to number 8, streaming might be stable, but the radio's pretty much done with it, which I wish was the case for Intentions by Justin Bieber and Quavo at number 9, which is here because the radio is propping it up despite being total ass. Finally, as the album bomb fades hard and fast, we've got Life is Good by Future featuring Drake at number 10, basically just clinging onto streaming at this point. And on that note, our losers and dropouts. In the latter case, we saw the collapse of both Future and Polo G from last week, although it's very telling that Future fell off harder than Polo G on the Hot 100, with the majority of songs exiting, along with Ballin' by Mustard and Roddy Ricch, and Someone You Love by Louis Capaldi. Finally. But of our losers, from Polo G, we had 21 at 95, Martin and Gina at 94, Be Something featuring Lil Baby at 93, Go Stupid with Emilee Choppa and Son of Vegas at 91, and Flex featuring the late Juice WRLD at 49. And for Future, Solitaires with Travis Scott at 83, and Trillionaire with Youngboy Never Broke Again at 85. And as for what's left, Daisies by Katy Perry and X by Jonas Brothers and Karol G, they slid off their debuts to 79 and 66 respectively, and Gooba by 6ix9ine took a collapse to 22, partially because the video got taken down for a couple days, and that's really all it has. Now, given we have an album bomb situation, there wasn't really that much that rebounded or returned. Yeah, Skybox by Gunna is back at 65, unsurprisingly, but it also rolled back with Lil Baby bringing back All In at 99, and Grace with 42 Doug at 97, and thankfully along with it, Don't Rush by Young T and Bugsy featuring Heady One at 92. And when it comes to our gains, I mean, I can point to Lil Baby rebounding again with We Paid with 42 Doug at 60, but in reality, it's all over the place. Be a Light with Thomas Rhett and Co. rebounding to 89, I Love My Country by Florida Georgia Line at 64, and Drinking Alone by Carrie Underwood at 87 in our country gains. Then we had Go Crazy by Chris Brown and Young Thug returning to 52, Supalonely by Benny and Gus Dapperton picking up to 44, In Your Eyes by The Weeknd picked up a remix featuring Doja Cat to rise up to 32, Watermelon Sugar by Harry Styles rising up to 45 on the radio run, and Party Girl by Stay Solid Rocky somehow continuing up to 27. Is this still here? Why? But now we got the album bomb from Gunna, and the vast majority of it is below the top 40. Thank God. So, discounting the best, and let's be honest, the worst that we have to discuss, we have Feigning at 98, although with that backing melody, it was close to the worst this week. A Money on the Way at 84, which featured the now classic line, "I've been dropping these hits like bird shit." Nasty Girl on Camera at 78, Met Gala at 70, Argentina at 67. I mean, it's amazing how Gunna can hit the tone-deaf point of bad guitar tuning and a mostly neutral Trump punchline. Blindfold with Lil Baby at 59, Wunna at 57, Top Floor with Travis Scott at 55, and Cooler Than a Bitch with Roddy Ricch, who probably has the best verse of what I heard on the album. But now for our new arrivals, which they actually start off with number 100, ILI by Surf Mesa featuring Emilee.
I need you, baby, to on these lonely nights. I love you, baby.
We're now at the point where basically any song that's off the beaten path in the Hot 100, we just have to assume that TikTok's behind it, right? And to explain this, well, remember the Frankie Valli song, Can't Take My Eyes Off You, that I actually talked about on my Made channel way back in my Best Hit Songs of 1967? Well, taking the previously over-the-top hook that operated in contrast to the slow elegance of the rest of the song, and giving it the whole summertime sadness treatment, with even more faded textures in the guitar and the sandy groove, and we got this barely formed whiff of a song. In other words, it's just perfect for TikTok. Now, I'm not gonna lie and say I dislike the groove or the vibe of this, but it has the feel of those remixes from the 90s where they just take a fragment of an established standard and drop a very generic beat beneath it. And once I came to that conclusion, I couldn't stop hearing it. But as it is, you know what? I'll stick with the original. Number 86, Gimmick by Gunna. So let me give Gunna the faintest bit of credit surrounding the songs that he has that work. They're effectively musical wallpaper. They fill up the background with underweight melodies and grooves to complement his complete lack of a personality, but at least there's a sense of momentum, maybe? Now, Gimmick, meanwhile, takes its washed-out bells and marries it to an utter clunker of a beat that is leaden with a lot of weak snares and no serious power. That's where all those burbling squonks come in to creak around it. But the problem, of course, remains Gunna, who not only has no vocal presence as a rapper, he proceeds to alternate between the overdone brand name advertisements, I mean references, and some truly disgusting sex lines. Nut inside, look like glue in your pretty kitty. I mean, once you hit that point, the disingenuous comparisons to Tupac and claims that he invented lingo at all, when in reality everything he has is appropriated from Young Thug, Future, and Migos, almost irrelevant because of how nauseating that one line is. It kills the song. Yeah, gross and bad. Next, number 76, Daechwita by Agust D. Okay, for those of you who don't follow K-pop, given their activism this past week, I'm inclined to be nice to them. Let me describe what this is. Agust D is a member of BTS, who also goes under the name Suga, and this is a single from his second solo album, where he actually sampled Daechwita music to form the horns and the backdrop of the song behind the trap beat, which can get a little awkward when you remember that in the past, this music was specifically reserved for Korean military usage, and it leads to about as much cultural clash as you would expect, which I'd normally be fine with, especially as Agust D is delivering a lot of intensity with his spitting, and the beat's pretty good, until you translate it, where it shifts to more flexing and some very militaristic lyrical reference points that don't quite hit the same way nowadays. Granted, different times, and I'm willing to accept a bad translation, but when you're not exactly crazy about the melodic tones behind it as it is, the intensity just doesn't quite resonate as strongly. I don't know, I get why this will definitely have an audience, but given the hip-hop side of BTS has usually been their clumsiest, sorry fans, not quite winning me over. That's all. Number 62, Need It by Migos featuring Youngboy Never Broke Again.
These bullets, he receive it, I can't see it. My wrist look like a snow cone, make her eat it. Once I see her, I give her that dope dick just like it's eat.
Wasn't Culture 3 supposed to be coming out at some point? Okay, apparently this is not a single from that, but from a mixtape they're planning to release ahead of time called the Quarantine Tape. And as exasperated as I am about any music referencing that, if you can't tell, I actually think this is a pretty decent song. I'm serious, I've always liked when Migos get away from long, interchangeable verses and they stay on faster flows. And if they're gonna interweave their bars with each other the way they do here opposite the melody sample from 50 Cent, a pretty legit bass line and better sounding percussion than normal, it doesn't sound as cheap as it normally does on a trap song, where Youngboy never broke again, he actually fits, I'm on board, especially when it's pure gunplay mode targeting anybody who has bit their style, which is a lot of people. See Gunna from earlier. But again, shows Migos focused on good production, and they do well more often than not than this lane. So yeah, you know what? It's good. Check this out. Solid song. Number 38, DOLLAZ on My Head by Gunna featuring Young Thug.
I put powder on my collar, cause she proud of what I said. I'm a leader, I got on following my footsteps like the feds.
Remember when Young Thug could at least fake like he cared? I mean, his verses empty brand names and sex references with his girls drinking his spit, but there's no flair to his delivery at all to sell it. If he was being a good sport so that Gunna could get all the attention, he really should have tried to show up everybody regardless. But let's be real, the reason I can't stand this, it's not Thugger underperforming or Gunna throwing out more forgettable lines over a leaden beat and really dreary melody. It's that someone decided that layered behind his vocals across half the hook and most of the ad-libs, he chose to throw on a chipmunk effect. I mean, was this his attempt to be interesting? Because somehow he became even less likable. And while I've got a far lower tolerance for that pitch shift than most, I mean, it's not like this was good before it. Now it just sucks. Next. And finally, number 1, Rain on Me by Lady Gaga and Ariana Grande. Oh, thank God, at least there's one great song here. And yes, you heard me right. Outside of Shallow, it's probably one of Lady Gaga's best singles in years. I'll be one of her more conventional ones. The splashy keys playing off the warping bass and guitars with hints of saxophone, the great touches around the pre-chorus and the melody, how Gaga and Ariana have legit vocal chemistry and are both great singers, how the song can strike the balance between smoothness to complement Ariana's delivery while still picking up some sinuous swell and bombast to back up Lady Gaga. Even if I think the vocals and the post-chorus sound a little overproduced, this is still really great. Hell, might be one of Ariana's better songs in a while too. And the content's solid. Of course they prefer not to be sad or heartbroken after getting taken advantage of in a cruel world, but they're still here, and they're gonna let that emotion flow, and that's valid. Now granted, if you're going for that, the song could have afforded to be a little more frenetic or chaotic to match it, but you know, I do get why it's not. And you know what, even if it didn't have much competition, it's easily the best of the week. It's a great song. Would Need It by Migos and Youngboy Never Broke Again as the easy honorable mention. Now the worst of the week, I'm going with Gimmick by Gunna, with DOLLAZ on My Head with Young Thug as a dishonorable mention, but really it's close there, and there's a few other Gunna songs like Feigning that were close there too. Next week though, it'll be where I would say Lady Gaga album bomb, but she's not really dominant on streaming like Ariana Grande or Billie Eilish are, and it doesn't look like anyone's checking for Lil Yachty anymore, so maybe things might calm down, who knows? At least here on the charts, at least for now, if nowhere else. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Billboard Breakdown on Spectrum Pulse. Black Lives Matter, and I'll see you next time. Stay safe.